More than 7 years ago, Abby Williams and Libby German were murdered in the town of Delphi. 2 years ago, Richard Allen was arrested and charged with murdering the girls. Now his trial is underway in the Carroll County Courthouse, which is less than 2 miles from where those two girls were last seen alive. Thanks for joining us tonight on WTHR Plus for your Delphi Debrief. I'm Scott Swan. Richard Allen's trial began today with opening statements from both sides and some very emotional testimony. Our legal expert, Katie Jackson-Lindsay, joins me in studio to break down the developments. We'll get to her in a moment, but let's begin tonight with our senior investigative reporter, Bob Siegel, and Emily Longnecker, who have covered this case since it happened back in 2017. So you were both in court today. What was that like?
Well, Scott, we wish that we could actually have you and our viewers be able to see what things were like for yourselves by having cameras in the courtroom. The reality is Judge Frances Gall ruled that cameras are not going to be allowed in the courtroom. She told us that reporters are allowed in, 12 media representatives are allowed in the courtroom. She said, you are more than welcome to take all the notes you want with pen and paper. So I've got 20 pages of notes here today. I know, Emily, you've got a whole bunch of notes today.
Yes.
And so I'm glad that we're doing these nightly events here, because our job really is to try and bring you inside the courtroom with us, since we are lucky enough to be in there to bring the feel of what's going on in the courtroom.
And it's limited who can be in there. Bob was in there this morning for several hours. I wasn't able to get in until later this afternoon on a break because there are a limited number of media passes. So we're juggling that reality too, and relying sometimes on reports from pool reporters who are coming out. And Bob and I were talking a little bit, Scott, about the challenge of reporting sometimes on things that you weren't there to hear firsthand.
Right.
That can be a challenge, right?
Because
you speak with more authority, I think, when you are the one listening to that testimony.
Absolutely. So let us set the scene for you. We're going to take you inside the courtroom to understand really day one of this trial, from my perspective, seemed like it was really to get the jury settled in to understanding their responsibility, the ground rules, and the law. And so very first thing that happened when the jury came into the courtroom, Judge Frances Gall explained to them the jury instructions. And she spent quite a bit of the 15 minutes of jury instructions talking to the jurors about the fact that if they are going to find Richard Allen guilty, they must do so beyond a reasonable doubt. And she explained what that means. And she told them that the burden of proof is solely on the state of Indiana, on the prosecutor. And she also said that if the state fails to prove each element of the murder charges beyond a reasonable doubt, she told the jurors, you must find the defendant not guilty. From that point, the jury got to hear opening statements, and let's walk you through those a little bit. Here's some of the highlights. The Carroll County prosecutor, he warned the jury that they were going to see some gruesome crime scene photos. That didn't happen today, but that will take place here over the next week or so. He also told the jurors that they are going to hear from witnesses who will place Richard Allen at the crime scene, and that they're going to hear confessions from Richard Allen. And he said that the details from those confessions are details that only the killer would know. And he also told the jury that the last face the girls saw before their throats were slit was Richard Allen's face. Very poignant comments from the prosecutor directly to the jury. Then things switched over to the defense. They got a chance to give their opening statements, and that lasted a full hour, which is what the judge allotted. So the defense team spent their hour giving their statements, telling jurors that the state's investigation was, in their words, messed up from the very beginning. Richard Allen, they said, is truly innocent. And they also told the jurors there is reasonable doubt, and when they hear that, it's going to make the state's case fall apart before your very eyes. The jurors then got to hear actual testimony, starting with the victims' families. Libby German's sister and father explained how the day of the murders started like a normal day, making banana pancakes for Abby and Libby before dropping them off near the Monon High Bridge. They described what they were wearing and how they didn't show up at the time they were supposed to be picked up at the arranged time. The jury heard about the frantic all-night search in the dark and repeated calls to Libby, calls that went unanswered. And in the most emotional testimony of the day, Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, told the jury about the moment she learned her granddaughter had been found in the woods. She broke down in tears, and she said, "I couldn't understand why they weren't taking me to her, and then I saw the coroner's van drive by, and that's when I realized they weren't alive." The jury's also learning about the terrain around the crime scene. The state showed jurors huge posters that have aerial pictures of the Monon High Bridge and the surrounding area where the girls' bodies were found. They also got to see a video showing the jury what the walk looks like from the spot where Abby and Libby were dropped off all the way to the Monon High Bridge and across the bridge. That's an effort to try to put jurors at the scene of the crime rather than taking them out to that rough terrain to see it in person. So today was really, again, it was about allowing the jurors to hear from the families, to try and personalize the girls and to let the jurors try to get to know the girls. There were a lot of questions to the family members, tell us and explain about who the girls were. And there was emotion. I know one part that ripped my heart out during the testimony was hearing Becky Patty describe the very final conversation that she had with her granddaughter when Libby told her grandmother that she wanted to go out to the Monon High Bridge. She said, "Okay, but I want you and Abby, who was having a sleepover there that night," she said, "I want you guys to have a jacket or a sweatshirt." And she told the jury, "The last thing she said to me was, 'Grandma, I'll be okay.'" And obviously we know things did not turn out okay. You got to hear some testimony, some emotional testimony from Abby's mom in the courtroom.
Yeah, Anna Williams, and this was her only child, Bob. Abby was her only child, and she testified today that she didn't even know that Abby was going to the Monon High Bridge that day. She had seen Abby the day before when she dropped her off at Libby's house to spend the night. She, she paused and teared up when she was asked to describe her daughter, her only child. She said she was a kind and helpful girl, that she was shy, that she wouldn't necessarily approach strangers, that she loved to read, that she was planning to play softball in the spring with Libby. So she talked about all of these things, and she talked about the fact that she was at work that Monday. She worked during the day, but then she had a second job at night where she worked in a local bar at the time. And she missed, she said, back-to-back calls from Becky Patty, like 3 in a row. And then she checked her phone. And then she finally took this call, and it was Becky Patty telling her, look, the girls had gone for this walk out on the bridge, and they were supposed to meet at an arranged time, and they were not there for the pickup. And that they were concerned, that they were worried. And so, I have to put my glasses on for this, Anna said that she told her boss, "I don't know what these girls are up to, but it's probably not that big of a deal," thinking, obviously, that she would be back. And the defense asked her to describe her daughter's voice. I thought that was an interesting question, and she said it depended, her voice tone depended on who she was speaking to, but generally she said that Abby had a high-pitched voice. Her testimony, not as long as Becky Patty's, close to 30 minutes. The majority of her testimony came from questions that the state was asking her, and when it was the defense's turn, they only had a few questions, and then they were done.
And Emily, we want to point out to our viewers also, there were a lot of questions specifically by the defense team asking the family members of Libby and Abby about the girls' voices and about Libby in particular, her sister and her grandmother and her dad. There were questions about just how much Libby would stick up for other people, how she didn't mind calling someone out. Her grandmother said she was very polite and respectful, but if someone was out of line, she wasn't afraid to call them out. And the defense really kind of hit on that multiple times about saying, did she have a loud voice? Did she, was she afraid to speak up? I think getting to the point and to try to get the jury to understand that perhaps put some doubt in their minds that if these girls were being attacked by someone who had a gun, they say that there was a gun, a person with a gun, they say that that person was Richard Allen ordering them to go down a hill, that trying to, I think, to insinuate that Libby would have spoken up and she would have fought back or she would have done something of that sort.
I think an interesting comment that Becky Patty made also was that she said that Libby had a strong intuition. And I remember that that is something that in the early days after the girls' bodies were found, Libby's grandfather, Mike Patty, saying when we learned that Libby had taken that video on her cell phone, that cell phone video, that she would have known to do that if she had had an instinct or an intuition that something wasn't right, that she likely would have known to roll video on that man that she was seeing on the bridge. So when I heard that comment today that Becky Patty made, that she had a strong intuition, it took me back to those times when I talked to Mike Patty about his granddaughter and about the fact that she had taken that stunning video when that came out. That, you know, back in the day, right. That was, I mean, it kind of took everyone aback that, wow, that these young girls, or this young girl had the presence of mind to take this video of potentially her killer.
By putting the family members on the stand today, I think it's important to point out that jurors are from 2 hours away. They're from Allen County.
Right.
They have not lived here for the last 7.5 years, since Abby and Libby went missing, since their bodies were found. The intense pain felt in this community is something that I think that the prosecutor wanted to introduce today to the jurors, to help them understand some of that pain that the family was feeling, to try again to humanize these two young girls, these teenagers who were murdered, to help them give insight into who they were and to bring them somewhat into this community on the first day of this trial to understand what those days, especially right around their disappearance and their murders, were like here.
And if you talk to members of this community, as we have over these past several years, they'll tell you that these murders changed this community, that this went from a town, this is a small, quaint bedroom community where people often used to sleep with their doors unlocked, and that's how they felt about things, and they didn't mind letting their children go to walk in the woods on the Monon High Bridge. But if you talk to young people here today that are around the ages that Libby and Abby would be, they will tell you that things changed for them as teenagers after the girls were murdered, that their parents suddenly were not willing to just let them go and have kind of a freedom. They wanted to know, you know, where they were and to check in all the time, and they just, life really changed for them as young people, certainly. I've heard that over and over. And then the community as a whole, there was just a sense of safety, I think, that you heard people talk about over and over again that was just then gone.
Right. And Emily, it's important to point out, and I want to remind our viewers, literally from the night that these two young girls went missing, you were here that night when the search was going on. This has been going on. I mean, this pain that the community's been feeling has been going on a long time.
A long time. And then that next day, and going to the school before it had come out to, you know, that their bodies had been found, just going and talking to the school administrator and some of the teachers and how worried they were. And then, of course, the terrible news coming out and the church service that night. And it was, I mean, I distinctly remember it was painful. You could see the pain on people's faces and the fear, quite frankly, because again, it just rocked people's worlds here that I remember.
We started at 9 o'clock this morning. We started a little bit late. The judge came into the courtroom. She apologized for things running a little bit behind. We got started, I think it was 11 minutes after 9 o'clock. The judge started on not a very happy note.
Not so much.
She pointed out that she had barred, I believe it is, 4 separate journalists from attending this trial for the entirety, the rest of the trial, because there were several journalists who did not carefully read her decorum order, which bars the media from not only getting video of the jurors, we want to protect their identity, but not even getting video of their vans when they pull up, coming in and out of the courthouse. And some of the sheriff's deputies noticed this morning that there were 4 still and television cameras that were recording them as they pulled up to the courthouse. The judge isn't going to put up with that at all. No. So she actually seized the camera equipment, the batteries, the SIM cards, and announced first thing this morning that those journalists will not be allowed back into this trial. So she's trying to set a very clear tone. She wants she wants to make sure that things are done right here, and that the jurors, their privacy and their safety is first and foremost.
You know, as she was excusing them for the day, she told them to go have a safe and peaceful night, that they were collecting their notebooks, that they were not to talk about, you know, after they left the court, to talk even amongst each other about, you know, the testimony today, and that they would get their notebooks back when they returned in the morning.
And if I'm correct, things broke right around 5 o'clock?
Right around 5 o'clock,
correct?
Yes.
Which is probably a little earlier than what we're going to be seeing on some days. The judge did say that she's going to kind of gauge how the jury is doing each day. We know there's going to be some really difficult evidence and testimony coming up, especially when the jury needs to see the crime scene photographs. She said on those days we might break a little bit early, but we expect, well, we might be going between 6 and 7 every day. Today we broke a little early, probably again easing the jury into things a little bit.
And as she broke, then it gave the media that was in there, that was part of the media pool, a chance to go and look at some of the exhibits. You know, as you know, we've wanted to see some of these exhibits that had already been entered into public record, so we got a chance to do that and see the exhibits. And one was the state exhibit, was a picture of Abby and Libby in the car on their way to the bridge. It was a selfie taken. It looked by Libby, who was in the front seat. She was wearing a tie-dye shirt, and in the back seat, there was Abby with her, you know, hair in a messy bun, and they were, you know, getting ready for a day out in the woods. It was a day off school. They had the day off school. It was unseasonably warm that day in February. It was a beautiful day. So to see that picture, and then you saw another picture that the defense had entered in as an exhibit, and was a picture that Libby took of Abby on that Monon High Bridge there walking.
And again, we had huge
maps,
huge posters, and to set the scene, an aerial of the Monon High Bridge, and the witnesses, particularly Libby's family, was asked to come up and show the jury on the map where they went out to search, where the girls were dropped off. There was that video, again, allowing the jury to see the actual trail and the bridge, wanting to, again, try to put these jurors at the scene, and there's going to be probably a lot more of that coming in the days ahead.
Yeah, and the last witness they had was a sheriff for Carroll County, sheriff's deputy, excuse me, for Carroll County, Cantron, Deputy Mitchell Cantron. He was the last witness of the day, and he talked about, he was the one that got the call from dispatch around 5:15 that day, and was connected to Mike Patty on the phone, and Mike Patty was telling him, look, 2 girls are missing. They went out in the woods. They were supposed to meet family at a specific time. They didn't. It's getting dark. We're concerned. And Deputy Cantron testified and got up and showed on the map, okay, here's where I drove out. Here is where I searched, kind of in an area, he said, like 5 to 7 minutes under the Monon High Bridge. He didn't see anything. He got out of his car. He looked around a little bit. It was not a long time. He said 5 to 7 minutes. And then he drove down a private drive that led to a man's property, Mr. Weber, and that he, you know, knocked on the door and told this man, hey, look, these 2 girls are missing. Can I search your property? And this is private property. And the man said, sure, go ahead. And he searched the property. But the defense kept asking, did you search the outbuildings? There were 2 other buildings on this man's property. Did you search those? And he said no. But basically he said he didn't. What he said was, quote, nothing stuck out. And then he said in the days following, he was in charge of following up on some of the tips that came in. And he told the jury he got no tips about Richard Allen.
Scott, we want to let you and our jurors know also just the demeanor of Richard Allen in court today. We were sitting maybe 10 feet just behind Richard Allen. We were right in the first row of the courtroom, right behind the defense and Richard Allen. He was wearing the same outfit he wore on the first day of jury selection on Monday. It was a light purple shirt, khaki pants, nice belt and shoes, not the prison jumpsuit that we've seen him wearing for most of the last 2 years since he was arrested. Of course, in a trial like this, the defendant is allowed to come in looking like they would normally look, not coming in shackles. So he started out right before the judge and right before the jury came into the courtroom. We saw him put his head down and he prayed for a moment. We saw him at one point get teary-eyed when they were talking about his family and his marriage and how it's been impacted. So again, we're going to be over the next few days, we are going to be in that first row again. 13 News was given media credentials to be there for today, for tomorrow, for Monday, and our intention is to be in the courtroom, Scott, throughout this entire trial to be able to bring firsthand accounts of what happens here in Delphi.
That is incredible insight, and we are so fortunate both Bob and Emily at certain points of today's first day of testimony were inside that courtroom. Thanks so much for giving us that input, and these are two reporters that know this case so well because they have covered it for 7 years. Thanks to you both there in Carroll County. Well, we want to bring in Katie Jackson-Lindsay, who's our legal expert. Want to thank you for coming in tonight. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what we've just heard Bob and Emily talk about as they summarize day one. What was the most important thing that you heard the jury hear today from the two sides?
Well, I think the most important thing that they heard today that they are probably wrapping their minds around is what they heard in opening statements. Each of the individual witnesses and the testimony they provided is certainly important, but those are little pieces of the bigger picture. So the most important thing would be the overview from each side, both the state and the defense, in terms of what they expect the jury to see and to keep an eye out for.
What do we know about, based on the opening statements for both the prosecution and the defense, in terms of their strategies moving forward in terms of shaping this case that they want the jury to hear?
Well, as far as the prosecution, I think that we can be pretty certain at this point that their strategy is pretty basic, and it should be, right? Because their strategy should simply be to reveal the truth, and their truth should be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so their strategy, it seems, is to just simply present their case, put on their evidence, and meet their burden. As far as the defense, I think that we got a very clear picture of their strategy today, and their strategy from the start is to challenge that evidence. They gave us a very good idea of some of the high-level details of the big pieces of evidence that are going to be critical to their defense and critical to really imparting on this jury that the state can't meet their burden. And so just clearly from the outset, their strategy is to show this jury that the state cannot meet that burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, obviously you try cases and you shape cases. Explain to our audience why the state would go ahead and put on family members right out of the gate to begin talking about these two young girls. Why not go right into evidence? Why put the family members on the witness stand to talk first?
Well, there are both technical legal reasons for that as well as strategic reasons. So in terms of the technical legal reasons, they have to prove that Richard Allen knowingly killed these girls. And along with that element of knowingly killed is having to prove that they were once alive. And so in every case, there's a next of kin witness who talks about that person in life just to establish that they were once alive. And that seems like a very simple and obvious thing, but it's something that the law requires. So you often in murder trials hear from a next of kin witness first. The other strategic benefit to that is that you are introducing your victim to the jury from the outset. This jury is going to hear the most gruesome things about the last day of these girls' lives. And so it's important that the jury gets to hear who they were before that day and to have some sort of emotional attachment to them as actual humans. And so there's that strategic part and that legal part, but also in this case, these family members are also fact witnesses, which is not often the case. Usually family members weren't there, they're not eyewitnesses, they may not have anything to offer in a typical murder case. But in this case in particular, they are a part of the story. They are the last people to see these girls, to talk with them, and to really understand what the girls' plans were versus what happened. And they also participated in the search. So they are also critical fact witnesses that introduce the story because they were there that day.
And as Bob and Emily summarized in their storytelling tonight, this jury is from Allen County, the Fort Wayne area, so they don't really know Carroll County and Delphi, and so maybe that's part of it as well.
Sure, absolutely. And again, as Bob highlighted, this jury is not as attached to this community, right? When you are speaking to a jury who is from the community where the crime occurred, they just have a different attachment and connection to the community and to their neighbors. These girls are not neighbors of these jurors. And so again, it's really important that they humanize it and that these witnesses also set the scene for what that bridge was like. We heard from Bob and Emily that they provided testimony in terms of the scene itself, the terrain. We also know that there was some testimony that came out about how difficult it would have been to run on this bridge, across this bridge. So to a certain extent, these family member witnesses are experts in their community, and they can really give the jury a sense of what that's like and really allow them to put themselves in that scene.
So let's talk about the opening statement. So the defense, they lasted about 3 times as long as the prosecution. So what do we learn from that?
Well, I think that's interesting in terms of strategy. As a defense attorney, I go into a trial knowing I don't have the burden of proof. And so at the juncture of that opening statement, I don't have to convince the jury of anything. And so you typically see a scenario where defense's opening statements are a more broad overview and reminding the jury to keep an open mind. Well, we saw the opposite of that today. The state gave a broad overview. The state gave a very brief summary of what they expect their evidence to show, and it was the defense that went into more detail. So I think what that signals to us is the defense's confidence that the state really has some problems with their evidence, and there are going to be some serious challenges to this evidence, and they were comfortable enough to put it on the table from the outset, and now the state is sort of on defense.
Yeah, the defense basically said the state's case messed up from the very beginning. They attacked, they talked about the witnesses, the phone data, and the so-called magic bullet that was found at the crime scene. So what did you think of those details being laid out?
Well, I think it was strategically brilliant to lay out those details. The defense attorney who delivered the opening statement, Andy Baldwin, he's a very skilled trial lawyer, and he knows that you can't go in front of a jury from the outset and make promises that you can't keep. And so I think that signals to us that he knows there are going to be problems that the state cannot fix. Another thing that I think that did for the defense that was strategically very important was it let the jury know at that moment, this is the evidence the state has today. He said things such as, well, I haven't been provided that, but maybe they'll show it to you. He also signaled to the jury that this investigation must have been quote unquote messed up because they are in fact still investigating. He mentioned that just 2 days ago, there were things that were still happening in the investigation. So presumably the state is still working on things that they're going to try to fix throughout the course of the trial, but based on defense's opening statement, they now know with certainty that there were some things they didn't have when the case started. Yeah,
the prosecution's first witness this morning was Libby's grandmother. Richard Allen didn't come up once in her testimony. Is that unusual? What do you make of that?
No, I don't think that's unusual considering the nature of her testimony. Based on what we now know that she knew, she wouldn't have any idea about the suspect or the killer or who did this to her granddaughter. And so I didn't think that was unusual at all. And in fact, ironically, I think we will find that most witnesses will never mention Richard Allen, that it will more so be a combination of the state's evidence that points to Richard Allen, and the state will have a responsibility to tie all that up and make that make sense for the jury.
So the prosecution says that Richard Allen abducted and killed the girls, left Libby's phone at the scene, and never returned. But the defense said Richard Allen and the girls were never on the trail at the same time. So why is the timeline critical to both of these cases here?
The timeline is so critical because in order for Richard Allen to be guilty, they had to be there at the same time. And so I think that was another one of those bombshell revelations today where the state's evidence is obviously in conflict with how the defense interprets that evidence. Because in order for this to happen, in order for him to be the killer, he would have had to have been there with them at the time they were there. And according to the defense, we can expect that the state's not going to be able to show that.
At some point, this jury is going to see photos of the crime scene. And that's going to be very difficult for these people to hear.
Sure.
How do you lay that out for this jury to see if you are the prosecution?
I think there's no easy way to do that. I think that we would have to assume that during jury selection, there were a lot of questions about, is this something that you can stomach? Is this something that you can keep an open mind about? You see that in any homicide trial, whether it's gruesome or it's just simply autopsy photos. And so I don't think there's any easy way for the state to do that. And they have to do that with some sense of sensitivity because they know that the girls' family members are there. But it's one of those unfortunate pieces of evidence that you just have to do it because it's a part of the big picture. It is the big picture.
All right, last question tonight. We know this is going to be a long trial. Judges indicated maybe a month or longer. Today's just day one. Do you see any scenario that would put Richard Allen on the witness stand at any point during this trial? Do you feel like he will be called?
I would guess not. I know as a defense attorney, you absolutely do not want to call your witness at trial, your client at trial unless you absolutely have to. And a lot goes into that analysis and that consideration. And so what you're going to see the defense doing the entire time is trying to tell Richard Allen's story without having to actually put Richard Allen on the stand. The other added challenge they have here is that we know that this judge has ruled that Richard Allen's alleged confessions that he made while in the Department of Correction pre-trial are going to come into trial. And to some extent, I think that poses an even bigger challenge in that analysis as to whether or not to put him on the stand because the defense has taken the position that he made those statements while under duress and while not in a good mental state. And so if you consider that, he can't even testify about making those statements because he wasn't even in the proper mental state to know that he was making them. So I would assume that we probably won't hear from Richard Allen, but what I can tell you, having been a defense attorney for a long time, is that's typically a last-minute decision, and it's important to remember that it's Richard Allen's decision to make. His attorneys can advise him, but ultimately he has to make that decision. All
right, good to see you. Thank you again for coming in and helping our viewers understand this complex case that is going to be going on for the weeks to come. Katie Jackson Lindsay will be with me every weeknight at 10 o'clock to break things down here at this Delphi Murders Trial. Again, we'll be here on WTHR Plus every weeknight, 10 o'clock. You can also find our ongoing coverage, including detailed reports of each day of this trial. Just go to WTHR.com/Delphi. Thanks for joining us here on WTHR Plus. Good night.